Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. We are here talking about inner life and I guess the complexities and the wonders of doing your inner work. Today and this month, we're talking about resistance to the work. And we have other podcast episodes that do focus on resistance to the work. So go ahead, take a look back on those. This month, we're getting into, I guess, some of the more uh, shall we say, convoluted ways or unconscious ways that we don't do the work that needs to get done to get where we want to go. Laurel, aren't you excited for our topic today?
I am. I'm excited about every time we show up together and talk.
I know, I love our conversations. They're just
Me
so
too.
rich. Yeah.
And yes, really deep conversations. And it just things just come out, come up,
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
through. So, but I love the topic of resistance.
I do too. I do too,
Eh,
because so many people are struggling, and when we're in a struggle, oftentimes it connects back to some resistance.
Yeah. But I'm just going to say one of the reasons I love it is because I really think when you start to recognize resistance as or for what it is, as resistance, that is like, I'm going to say, a turning point in self awareness,
Yep. Yep.
right? Because for years, I can tell you, resistance was not on my mind,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And now when I have that feeling come up, I can really let that be and recognize it in my body, not
Yeah.
in my mind, but in
Hmm.
my body as resistance.
Yes. Yes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today too. The difference, like the body, the mind, the emotions, right? How they
Yeah.
play into all of the resistance that we experience, and how, depending on how you're wired, you might use one more than another as your marker or your
Yes.
helper, so to speak, right? Yeah.
Or use them all as kind of that. I like to call it a QAQC, the quality control,
Oh,
quality
that's
check,
good. Yeah. Uh-huh.
right? Because sometimes we go right into our head and we have the what we're going to talk about today, and you haven't even told our listeners yet what that topic is, but
Yeah.
you have the thoughts
Mm-hmm.
that might sound like rational reasons why not to do something.
Yeah.
But if you can check with your other intelligence, your body, your
Yeah.
emotions, sometimes you can really get clear on, is it resistance or is it my intuition giving me some heads up that I should slow down, right?
Yeah. Or as Carolyn Mace would say, is it my resistance to my intuition
Oh,
that's
yes.
going on right here? So
That's right.
let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is
Okay.
distractions and irritations as resistance. I see this a lot with my clients. Do you see this in your
I see it all the
clients? Yeah,
time.
body. Yeah, me too.
All the and I'm going to say I see it with my own in my own behavior with myself.
Yeah, yeah, I know I've been through a lot of my own of that. Thankfully, not so much anymore, because I own it when it comes up. That's the difference, right? Is now I
Yeah.
know it's resistance. I own it. I slow down, I stop, and I deal with it. So we're going to talk about that as well
Oh,
today.
great.
Yeah.
Such
Yeah.
a juicy topic.
Such a juicy topic. So I'll just pick up where I kind of left off, or where we entered into this, was this, me listening to Carolyn Mace on the regular now, this right now in this period of time when we're recording for you all out there. So you're getting the benefit of me and uh, my gleaning wisdom from Caroline Mace around our intuition, right? So she really digs in deeply to this idea of distractions and irritations being a block to our intuition. Yeah, it's really just a big block that we don't want to see actually how powerful we can be. So we get waylaid and we completely put our focus over on something else that maybe has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
really.
and can
Yeah.
you remember a time in your life where that happened and now you see it differently after listening to this?
Yeah, I would say I would say my most recent, I would imagine that it's happened a lot in my life. And probably for me, all right, I'm going to do it, look at the bigger picture. I'm going to like zoom out a little bit because I feel like this one's great. I had a lot of, um, let's say I did a big dance with anger in my youth, right? Where I couldn't express it. I didn't know how to express it well. So I stuffed it a lot. And yet it was there in me. And I want to say, along my journey, that I believe now, looking back, right, is I was very intuitive. I understood what the dynamics were going on in my house at an age where I couldn't express it well or have a good discussion about it or even have anybody to discuss it with, right? So it was all like this festering kind of thing going on. Um, and so at that point, right, it was appropriate. But later on, it just became a distraction to dealing with the fact that, look, I could feel things. I could take the temperature of the room. Intuitively, I understood the dynamics of what was going on. And so, I had to acknowledge that. And then I had to decide, what am I going to do with it once I acknowledged it?
Yeah.
And not just keep using the excuse of this is irritating me or I need to solve that problem over there when it had nothing really to do with me
Yeah.
ultimately.
It's
It might have
so,
bothered me, but the situation itself had nothing to do with me. And that's the difference, right?
yeah. It's so interesting to think about, how often irritation comes up,
Hmm.
right? And like you're saying, it had nothing to do with you,
Yeah.
right? I mean, anger is a pretty intense irritation, right?
Yeah.
But it's just that, and I also put it in the category of an emotion, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah. A
and so
feeling, emotion. Yeah.
what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Um, really accept, just explore.
Explore. And I want to come back to the idea of, if you are struggling with a lot of irritations, a lot of anger issues, go back, listen to the anger from earlier this season. I went through 5 ways to consider your anger and work with it proactively in a way that's positive. Anger ultimately has to do with the boundaries, the way that you're organizing your life, and you can relieve yourself of your anger. You have the power to relieve yourself of your anger. We often
Yes,
don't believe that we do, but we do.
yes.
Yeah.
And um, sometimes we our anger is displaced, right? And we could probably do a whole nother episode on anger.
Yeah.
But, if you think about it as a distraction or an irritation and what it's keeping you from,
Mhm.
because it's an external focus emotion,
Yeah.
rather than really getting clear of what is it in me? What do I need to be looking at internally about myself in order to work through this distraction?
Right, right. Yeah. So, one of the primary ones, right, that we often come back to here, the way to work with this, right, is first. So let's kind of go back to the beginning of where we started. How do we work with this? And you were talking about, feeling in your body, recognizing in your body, right? When
Yes.
you're in that state, something is there's resistance going on, and now you see it as that, right? So can you talk a little bit about that for you, and then we'll go into some of the other, areas too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it often shows up for me, I'm going to say this, in work, right?
Mhm.
Or sometimes it shows up, I'll say, in relationships as avoidance, right? But this distraction that shows up and being able to get out of my head and really feel into the sensation, the physical sensation. And so, for instance, maybe the word dread is a good word because
Mhm.
we know many people know that feeling of dread.
Yeah.
Um, that is a feeling that when it shows up in my body, I question,
Mhm.
right? I'm like, oh, this feeling is my clue that I'm avoiding something. I'm I'm letting myself be distracted by other things so I don't feel this feeling.
Right. And so I don't have to go towards it and
That's
whatever the
right.
issue thing is that I need to deal with, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because in my coaching with my clients, often, dread is not a feeling that most of us allow our bodies to bring forward, I'm going to say, right? We fill our time so full that our mind is going, our body is active, and so there's no space or time for the bodily sensations to come up.
Right. And oftentimes
Um,
they surface first thing in the morning, right? As
oh
you're
yeah,
waking up. That's often the
yes,
time when or going to sleep and why we have trouble sleeping sometimes.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this, it shows up in a way with words that we all use or that we've heard, procrastination, right? So I think the clue of tapping into your body's wisdom and allowing space and time for the sensations to come through.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, because we live in such a cognitive, head thinking world,
Yeah.
culture, you know, start with the awareness of the words, right? If you find yourself procrastinating or avoiding, right, that's a great clue to quiet and ask, what is the underlying emotion,
Mm-hmm.
right? That that is behind the procrastination or the avoidance. And um, and then once you can kind of use some words to give yourself permission to ask your heart and your intuition, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before. I do this practice a lot. Hands over my heart, and I ask
Mhm.
my heart, "What do you have to tell me about this?"
Yeah, that's great. What do you have to
And
tell me about this? What do you have to tell me about this? What is it that I need to know right now from you? Right?
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then I move to either my belly
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes my third eye for
Mm-hmm.
the intuition. And I ask my intuition, what do you have to tell me about this? Now, when I do this practice, I have to tell my head, not your turn. It's not your turn. No one asked you,
Mm-hmm.
because my head
Hmm.
wants to jump in and give me the answers.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's really been how I've worked through really, getting in touch with my body's wisdom and allowing some space for it.
Yeah. And so I want to say for anybody who feels like they're really a head thinker, absorbed in their thinking mind, having a lot of trouble, right? Moving beyond that space. That's Laurel. You've talked about how that was a primary issue for you and one of your biggest chunks of work that you did early on, right? As you were
Oh,
really
yes.
starting to steep in personal development, right? And getting into your whole beingness. So this practice really worked for you. And so I would encourage anyone to try it. Yeah.
It did. I was really disconnected from my body's wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, a lot of times distractions and irritations will come through the thinking mind as stories, little stories and little
Yeah.
judgmental stories about the world, about life, about other people, about the situation, about your family, about, right? They do that, don't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if you can see that and begin to like stop, ask yourself to take a pause, right? If like I know I have clients where I listen to a story, over and over and over again. They are stuck in a story of some point in their life. And we need to like stop there, right? Right there and say, why are you stuck here? you know and if it goes back to childhood, some part of you is still a child stuck in that story, right? How are we going to help you grow up and take responsibility for now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the work that we do. This is kind
Yes.
of like the weaving of find the place and then start to follow the trail, follow the
Yeah.
breadcrumbs. Yeah.
Right. And, when you think about, you don't have to dive right into the big work,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I think about this topic, I think about the irritation of being in a slow a checkout
Mm-hmm.
line at the grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
or being stuck in traffic if there's an accident on the highway and you are dead stopped, right?
Yeah.
Like how often do little tiny irritations come up? I
Yeah.
mean, they don't feel little at the moment.
Right. They can
We're
feel huge.
irritated,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're irritated.
Yeah.
But, you know, like starting with those in a playful way, right?
Yeah.
It's so much easier than
Yeah.
starting with maybe a relationship in which you're irritated, right?
Yeah, yeah, or a big life question that you're stuck in,
That's right.
right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, and I do think the starting this small, hopefully, starts to give you an opportunity to start to gain, number one, some skill and some strategy to put into place to practice again and again, right? In the little ways.
Yeah.
So you want to do something and you want to do it a little repetitively if you find, that it's making any kind of crack in that, pattern. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then stick with it, keep evolving it forward, right? Like so sitting in traffic is like, road rage and all the stuff that people are dealing. Why is that happening? I mean, we're talking about why that's happening now, right? People feel so irritated and upset about the conditions of so many things in the world and their lives and are not dealing with it directly. And so the result is this outpouring of, rage and disruption to the community and, civilization at large, so to speak. Yeah.
And talk
So,
about displaced, right? Like
yeah.
that, and can we talk for a minute about the distractions and how distractions as resistance are similar but different than the irritations?
Yeah, I feel like distractions, I don't know, when I think about distractions, it's almost like I feel like distractions are a little bit more about almost third chakra, like your will work, like redirecting yourself, having the strength, the inner strength to like redirect yourself well, to recognize I'm focusing on something right now that is not in alignment with my goal of the day, the way I want to live my life. Like here, if you're in a place where you want to be living a life that's coached, so to speak, or counseled, right? We begin with what do you want from your life, right? We begin at kind of at the top, the overlooking, the overarching um, place of what are we actually working towards here, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the umbrella, and those are those big values. And then we start nutting it down into smaller chunks of, okay, how are we going to actually play this out? And so we want to be able to see what is got nothing to do with what's happening in that moment of that day that I need to be getting done or I want to be focused on. And then in the greater picture as well.
And I often think because it comes up a lot with clients, you know, when we all have, each of us at some point in our life, we're like, I want something to be different, right? I might not know what I want, but I know what I'm currently living that I want to be different,
Yeah.
right? And so
Mhm.
we start to work towards change. And whether it's our stories or our behavior, our patterns, our stuckness where we are, right? It shows up and we are distracted from our ultimate, the change that we know we need or want. And
Yeah.
I think when we do that, I think it's resistance to the work because we there's so much when you start that inner work
Mm.
and creating that beautiful work and beautiful life.
Yeah.
There's so much that changes, and we say we want the change, but the risk of changing and how it affects, you know,
The whole
our
thing.
livelihood, our
Yeah,
relationships,
I
our way of
know.
being, our acceptance, our belonging,
Yeah.
right? And so it's almost as if we find ways to let everyday life distract us from what we want
Mhm.
because we're afraid of going through the change
Yeah.
that we need to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of this is, again, when you start like weaving your way back, right, is many times it's about growing yourself up in different kinds of ways, right, that got
Yeah.
stuck along the way. And it's okay. I mean, I want to come back to wherever you are, if you're looking at yourself or you're sitting and you're listening, you're thinking, wow, like, I'm just a mess of distractions. I know that, I'm not doing what I need to do or whatever. It's okay. It's okay to be there.
Absolutely.
Like you don't want to judge yourself. Like judging is another distraction, irritation, just added on to the one that, you're already looking at, right?
Yes.
So that's the wrong direction, exact wrong direction to go. Like the minute the judgment comes in, you want to go, oh boy, here I am, just adding on another distraction. And say, no, what is it really here that I need and want to take care of? And we come back to this again and again, and we will. The deeper you go into the work, the more it is like, well, what do you really want?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
if you,
that's a hard
I,
question.
I was just going to say, if you don't know, that's okay too. But you've
Yeah.
got to ask yourself it. You have to begin to start asking that regularly because if you ask it every single day, at least once when you're irritated or distracted, guess what? Answers will start coming. Even if they don't come at the beginning,
Yes,
they will start coming, won't they, Laurel?
they will. Yeah. And, let's talk for just 1 minute about you and I have had this conversation before. Maybe we don't know what we want because we've never asked ourselves that question, but we also have never been asked that question, or rarely are we asked that question by other people. Like,
Yes.
imagine a world where children at a very young age are asked, "What do you want?"
Yeah. Now, this is a tricky one. I want to go here because I want to be careful of this for parents that are listening, right? Um, we do want to know what our child wants, but the child should not get what the child wants all the time.
That, well, oh,
Right. So yeah, it's this tricky, it's kind of the ability to write as we go into our own parenting mode, and we do this a lot when we do our inner work, is we grow ourselves up to become our ideal parent, so to speak, so that we can
yeah,
respond to ourselves in ways that we wish that we had been responded to and encouraged, and we weren't.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah. So that's big. I mean, that in and of itself is big. Just take that in for a
it
second.
is.
We're
It
take a
is.
breath and take that one in, right?
Well,
Like, ooh.
and I think, I mean, I'm not implying that parents need to let their
Yeah,
children
yeah.
live into their wants every moment of the day. But
Yeah.
I do think like um it, being asked what you want, no matter what age you are,
Yeah.
gives you space and time to be able to voice your needs and your wants.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean someone's going to make those happen,
Right.
but it just reminds me of, you know, when my children were young, we had family votes. And they always had an opportunity to voice what they thought, what their opinion was, what they wanted.
Yeah.
And and my husband, when he came into our family, my kids were 4 and 6, and he was like, "What the heck is this family vote?" We're the parents, they're the children.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know myself how good it feels when someone turns to me and asks me what I need or want,
Yeah.
what what my opinion is of something,
Yeah.
right? And this is the work we do, right?
Right.
And so maybe it is this inner work of reparenting yourself and listening to your own internal
Yeah.
voice of
Right.
what your needs and wants are. And this is why I think distractions and irritations do take our attention away.
They
I
do.
look at I look at them as very external focused,
Hmm.
right? And in that, it brings up, well, we're not spending time doing the inner work if all of our focus is external,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know?
Yeah, and that would be one way to start to self-evaluate, to begin to work with this. If you're doing some journaling or you're doing some work with this, as you're listening to the podcast and going forth, is beginning to look at during the day, doing a reflection. Maybe you do it 3 times a day, or twice a day, midday, and then in the evening. What distracted me this morning from what I really wanted to do, right? And Jen, just list them out. Don't go into the why, how, what, I'm trying to change it, right? Like one of the best ways to work with resistance is to like literally chip away at it, you know? It's like,
Yes,
yeah, because I feel like trying to make the big leap, if it doesn't work, it's like you're almost piling on some more resistance at some
that's
level.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the question or the way you phrased it before was, in alignment with, right? So,
Yeah.
maybe it's that check. Did the choices I made today, how I spent my time, my actions, were
Mm.
they in alignment with what I need and want?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because we'll never get what we need or want unless we're aware of
yeah, what it
how
is.
what it is and are we committed to it?
Yeah, right, right. And first, so if we don't know what it is, it's hard to commit to it, right?
Yes,
And then we feel
yes,
lost in general in the world and what to do and how to proceed and all of that. And so that's why this kind of what we want is that North Star. And it's not, that see, here's the one of the things I know that comes up for many people, again, resistance, right? Is if I do what I want, what are the people in my life going to think if I'm not doing what I said I was going to do before, or I start changing?
yeah,
And so we come back to again, communicating. I
yes,
realized, wow, this isn't exactly what I want. Doesn't mean I'm going to dump the whole thing, but it does mean I need to start making some modifications so that, I'm not showing up irritated all the time or whatever. I mean,
yeah,
are generally happy when you're happy. Yeah.
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 Two questions that might be helpful for our listeners as well. The question, and I ask this a lot in coaching, and I ask myself, what's getting in the way,
Yeah.
right? And so you might not know what you want
Hmm.
precisely, but knowing what's getting in the way of even getting clarity about what you want, right? What
Yeah.
is getting in the way? And
Yeah.
that, as I was thinking about that question, reminded me of um, Deb Ayer, who was
Mhm.
our guest last year.
Yeah.
Um,
Great guess.
and we can put that podcast episode in the show
Hmm.
notes. But I did a 1-day retreat with her last April, and she took us through an exercise of focusing on the space in between. And what I love about this is if you think about if you have the clarity of what you want, or even if you are working to figure out what it is you truly want, focusing on the space in between and really embracing what is there, it shifts the whole mindset of what's getting in the way, what's holding me back, because whatever it is in the space in between, you need to really get comfortable with, get familiar with in order to understand it and embrace it and move through it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, interestingly, when we're doing meditation and we're talking about meditation and meditation techniques, so there's two, I would say, primary kinds of meditation. One is like a focused meditation where you're focusing, say, on your breath, right? And you're going more deeply into the thing that you're focused on, or trying to take your focus completely there and let everything else go away. So that's a focused meditation. Then there's open focus meditation, which you're going to find if you go back through our meditations. I actually offered one of those at one of the full moons. So you're going to find one of those. Um, and that is what you're talking about, which is it trains the brain and the mind in a different way rather than staying focused on the thing, right? Instead, it takes you into open space between things. And in fact, that's really, really helpful for your nervous system, especially in the today's world that we live in, because so many people are so hyper focused and so busy focusing on computer, on phone, on this, on that, right? That they don't have that capacity to go into that more spacious feeling, open focus experience where the brain actually resets in other ways. Yeah, so powerful suggestion there at the end too, Laurel,
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
You know, I just can't wait to really start, I don't want to say thinking, but really maybe incorporating that open focus
Yeah.
and this space in between in my life again.
Yeah.
It's so because you got me right, hook, line, and sinker when you said calming your nervous system. Like you know
Mhm.
me, I just
Yeah.
love learning new ways to manage my nervous system,
Yeah.
and I love it. So I can teach that to my clients too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe we should wrap up there unless anything really is coming forth that we should include before we call ourselves to
No,
the end of our show today.
no.
I want to encourage our listeners to I would just want to reiterate, this idea of don't don't judge yourself. Really, if you find yourself doing that, just say to yourself, "Oh, judgment is just a distraction. Judgment is just a way of irritating myself so I don't stay focused on what it is that I really want or what it is I really need to do here that's important to me."
Yeah,
And make it your mantra for a while if you find that that's what's going on. Your mind will shift, but you've got to encourage it, to practice that and get the new groove going. I always think of that, get your mind doing a new groove, right? It's been doing this groove, this dance for a while of irritation, distraction, judgment, And so you got to introduce a new move, you got to get your
yeah.
groove on in a new way.
That's right. That's right. And I really love that, the judgment as a distraction because, whether it's self-judgment or judgment of others, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
more often than not, judgment leads to irritation. So
Oh, I see it all
I
the time
know.
with people. I just turn on the news, you can see it.
Well, judgment, the key to irritation.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
Uh,
thank you, Laurel, as
yeah,
always.
thank
Such a
you.
great conversation.
Yeah, so we have one more show on resistance, and we've got another good one for you. So stay with us. We'll be back next week for another dose of how to work with your resistance.
I'm looking forward to it already.
Me too. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye.